Hello class. Today we're going to be covering chapter 3, which looks at causes of delinquency through various theories. So this is going to be a little bit of a drier lecture, but I'll try to spice it up and make it interesting for us. So our learning objectives for this lesson are to summarize the principles and influences of the classical school of criminology, describe biological theories, psychological theories, sociological theories, and integrated theories. So we're going to cover them all. Let's start off with classical school of criminology. So classical school of criminology says that humans are rational beings willing to give up certain liberties to the state so that society can establish rules and sanctions that preserve public order. It also assumes that everyone has free will and this idea of equal justice for all. So we have two founders here. We have Caesar Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham. Caesar Beccaria wrote On Crimes and Punishment. So he developed the idea of sort of this social contract of punishment where punishment should deter crime and not provide for social revenge. So it should be public, immediately, and only when necessary. So this idea of certain and swift, and that it is also proportionate to crime. You then have Jeremy Bentham, who wrote an introduction to the principles of morals and legislation. He said that really a rational person is going to do whatever is necessary to achieve maximum pleasure and minimum pain. So there's 4 objectives of punishment. Those objectives are that it should prevent all offenses, that it should convince a person who intends to commit a crime to commit a less serious offense, to convince a person to do no further criminal action than is what's necessary to accomplish their purpose, and to prevent crime at all possible costs to society. So in this case, this idea that delinquency should be punished because they deserve it, and that these individuals are rational thinking who have free will. But we know that's not the case with juveniles. We then move into rational choice theory, which is similar to classical school. So this is going to assume that the juvenile is going to weigh costs and benefits and that they again have free will. So the routine activity approach really focused on increasing females in the workforce. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It's because we saw an increase in females in the workforce, the argument is that there was a lack of guardians then during the day to oversee juveniles and oversee individuals, and that's where more crime came from. So those also says that those who go out more are more likely to be a victim of a stranger, and those who stay in are more likely to be a victim of someone who is known to them. So in this case, individuals will engage in problem solving, where they're getting short-term pleasure out of the delinquency, but also says that there is this natural desistance of offending because it's not going to align at some point with holding a job and starting a family. So people will rationally age out of crime and naturally desist. And really that delinquency is more spurious than it is planned, that they don't really formulate a scheme or have the intent to act. They don't assess alternatives and then choose the best course and then construct a method to achieve that intended result. Juveniles really just do. They just act. They don't think long term. And that there's biological, psychological, and social factors that can impact one's freedom of choice. So even though we're rational thinking, all of these different factors are converging to impact that. So here we have a few different justifications then for punishing a person. The first is that it's going to provide beneficial consequences where we're protecting the public. So say we're incarcerating someone, protecting the public, we're preventing further disorder by punishing that person, and thereby reducing social harm. You also have this idea of that it's deserved. So just deserts, if you do the crime, then you should be able to do the time. It also expresses public outrage. So it says that, hey, we as a society are not going to allow this behavior to occur, and therefore we're punishing you for it. That it teaches someone a lesson. So we have this deterrence idea, whether general or specific, that maybe I saw someone get punished, so I don't want to do that, general, or specifically I've been punished, so it's teaching me a lesson and I'm not going to do that again. And lastly, that it helps maintain government, social structure, and society. The idea here is that a state can't survive without having a set of rules that's going to sort of create, support, and protect the structure of that state and its functions. So that therefore we formalize these rules into laws so that we can control individuals' behavior that's going to threaten either others' security or well-being. And that's essentially where our laws and another justification for punishing people comes from, that we need to be able to maintain order within society. Some other goals and philosophies then of punishment, you have general deterrence, which is aimed at the public. Again, I see someone be punished, I don't want that. Or maybe you see a cop and you slow down so you don't speed. Specific deterrence is aimed at an individual person. So if I've been arrested, well, I really don't want to be arrested and go to jail again, so I'm not going to steal from someone again. Incapacitation is just fully removing someone from the community and society until they are able to learn from that. And this idea is we're punishing you because you did something wrong, and we're going to incapacitate you. We're going to pull you out of that situation so you don't have the opportunity to offend again. Rehabilitation, or providing treatment, is a form of punishment because not everybody wants treatment and rehabilitation. So it technically could be a punishment for some. Some people don't want to go through therapy or get drug and alcohol help. But it's really the best type of punishment, in my opinion, that we have available to us because we're treating the root of the problem, if you remember from last chapter. And then this idea of retribution or just deserts, so that the punishment just is simply deserved. This person deserves it. And restoration. So reintegration by giving that person opportunities to make amends and repair harm that they've caused. If they graffitied a wall, they can restore that by repainting over it and taking their graffiti off. If they've stolen from someone, they can pay back that restitution. Different examples of restoration. Now we're going to jump into the history of positivism. So here in positivism, human behavior is really just seen as one part of natural order. And the laws govern human behavior, and once they're understood, they can be modified to get rid of society's problems and make them better. So this works off of three assumptions: that character and personal background can explain delinquent behavior, that delinquency is determined by prior causes, so it actually rejects the idea that people possess freedom of choice, and that delinquency is fundamentally different than non-delinquency. So with the positivism theory, poverty is really seen as a major cause of delinquency. Not that juveniles are choosing to engage in it, but it's based on their status of being in poverty. So the biological positivism, we have Cesare Lombroso, who is the father of criminology, and he is actually the founder of biological positivism. He believed that people were simply born criminals. You have Henry Goddard with this idea of genealogy, where he actually found that over 50% of juvenile delinquents had mental deficits. And even today, we know that 2/3 of juveniles involved in the juvenile justice system, do actually have some type of mental health diagnoses. And then you have Ernst Kretschmer, who had this body type theory, where he said that you had different body types, and those who were of the strong and muscular type, they were going to be more of your delinquents. Those who had soft skin and lacked muscle were individuals who were not going to engage in delinquency. So you had this idea that the physical attributes of a person, so again, biological, your physical attributes had something to do with whether or not you would engage in crime. When we look at positivism today, we have sociobiology, which really tries to link that genetic factor and the environmental factor. So it says that criminal behavior has both biological and social aspects. And we know that there are some biological aspects. For example, we know that addiction can be passed down through generations, that people can be more prone to addiction, and that's a biological factor. We also have neuropsychological factors, though, with delinquency. So these are some of the areas that are receiving the most attention. The first one being neuropsychological factors and delinquency, and then also the relationship between temperament and negative behavior. So, temperament is really the activities and emotionality of a person, and activity is sort of the motor movements, the actual physical what someone's doing. Emotionality is the emotional reactions that someone has. So that someone's temperament and then there's negative behaviors are linked. An example is hyperactivity. And there are three common behaviors in juveniles who are hyperactive. They're impulsive, they are inattentive, and they have excessive motor activity. They're always moving around. So having those motor movements, and they're not able to properly tend to the negative emotionality that they're experiencing, and that comes out then in negative behaviors. We also have psychoanalytic theory by Sigmund Freud, who is the founder, and it's based on a biological determinist view. So there's three insights that really shaped handling of juvenile delinquents. Says that children who cannot control their id cannot distinguish socially acceptable from unacceptable behaviors. That children must learn to control their sexual and aggressive drives, which create an inner tension that they then have to learn how to resolve in positive ways. And then you have this emotional experience before the age of 5. So this emotional trauma, if that happens, that affects children lifelong, all the way into adulthood. And we do know that, in fact, childhood trauma has a huge impact on an individual's life, on the way that they think, they react, they behave. And if that goes unaddressed, it can really impact someone even more. So now we're going to cover behavior and emotions. So sensation seeking says that an individual needs to have varied, new, and complex sensations or experiences. And in order to do that, they're willing to take certain physical and social risks so that they can achieve this optimal level of arousal. So Jack Katz said that offenders engage in this emotional process of seductions and compulsions, and really that crimes are sensually compelling due to either immediate social or the social environment or their experiences that they're having. We then have this idea of the psychopath, which just says that typically, so someone who is a psychopath is someone who has a conduct disorder. They lack affect, they're unable to empathize with individuals, and they commit crimes in such a cold-hearted and unemotional manner. And that there's antisocial personality disorder checklist, which lists things such as being cunning or manipulative, lacking remorse, again, or empathy, being very callous or impulsive. And Robbins actually found that over 50% of adult male sociopaths had an onset of symptoms actually before the age of 8. So that's something that we could even assess for early on. And if we could assess for it early on, the question is, could we address that early on and try to increase someone's affect and empathy? And then we have reinforcement theory, where we say that behavior is governed by its consequent rewards and punishments that are reflected in the history of the individual. So the rewards of crime are things like material gain, which are typically immediate. And then you have the consequences, which are, say, maybe disapproval from their peers or being punished, or maybe even revenge from the victim. But a lot of these take a longer time to see, which is why sometimes rewards appear to outweigh the consequences for that person. So they're just being consistently reinforced by those rewards, and the punishments are taking a little bit longer to be seen. You then have sociological theories. So sociological positivism says overall, crime requires addressing social reform, so looking at social and cultural conditions, rather than just looking at the individual. So social structure theories say that crime is a result of social disorganization, cultural deviance, and status frustration. So you have social disorganization theory, which says crime is simply a result of a breakdown of social control by the family and neighborhood because of social disorganization that's occurring in the community. And that disorganization can look like deteriorated buildings, high school truancy, and even infant mortality rates. You then have this idea of cultural deviance, which says that the lower class has its own cultural history, and the motivation to engage in crime is just intrinsic in lower class cultures. So some of the focal concerns were identified as being trouble, where they said that trouble was a preoccupation of the lower class. That toughness, so being a good fighter, was sort of this ideal personality among those of the lower class culture. Smartness, but in the sense that you're able to outsmart other people. Excitement, so this relates to the widespread use of alcohol and drugs. Having fate, so this idea that they have no control over the outcome of their life, and that a lot of individuals who come from sort of inner cities, lower socioeconomic families, will simply say that I assume I'm not going to make it past my 20s anyway. So that's fate. I have no control over it. Something's going to happen to me anyway. So what does it matter? I can do whatever I want. This idea of autonomy, or having that desire for personal independence. You then have a status frustration, or this strain theory idea, which says that cultural goals and the means to achieve them have to be reasonably related if you're going to keep a culture stable. So when people don't actually have legitimate means to achieve the goals of whatever society or culture tells them that they should have, then they turn toward criminality in order to achieve them. Pretty simple. If you see everyone with a big house and a nice car, you're going to want a big house and a nice car. And if you came from maybe a lower economic area, you didn't go to such a great school, they didn't have the resources other schools did, you now can't get into college, you now can't get as high paying of a job, so maybe you turn to selling drugs or even trafficking guns to be able to achieve those things that society says you should have. So now we move on to opportunity theory, which says that lower class cultures are asked to behave in a manner that they will accumulate wealth, while also denying them legitimate means at the same time to obtain that wealth. So that delinquent subcultures are really developed in a response to blocked opportunities. So again, I'm not going to walk through this entire graphic, but you can sit down and take a look through it. So really just keeping in mind here that the delinquent subcultures that are created, they're created because they're being blocked and denied the opportunities to obtain that wealth and that status. Similarly, the theory of delinquent subcultures then here says that the destructive and malicious behaviors of lower class delinquency, that these subcultures are a reaction to then not actually achieving those middle class norms. So here you add the American dream, socializing an individual in lower class, but maybe putting them in institutions and schools where they're also engaging with middle class individuals. They now feel like they can't measure up, and they're now frustrated. They have a loss of self-esteem, and the reactions that form now are delinquency behaviors, because they've not been able to achieve the middle class norms that they were told they should be achieving by now. So looking at social process theories, this really examines the interactions between people and their environment that influence an individual to become involved in crime and delinquent behavior. So you have differential association, which is when individuals learn crime from others and is a product of social interactions. Containment says that it's an internal control and external control systems that interact to produce crime. So internal controls are things like having self-control and a high tolerance for being frustrated. External control systems are things like buffers in your immediate environment. And then you have social control, which says that delinquent behavior is linked to the bond a person has with their social groups. So the stronger elements of the bond are less likely to engage than in delinquent behaviors. So having attachment to conventional individuals and conventional activities, or being committed to conventional values, having involvement in those conventional activities, so actually being involved, whether that's in, say, church groups or some clubs, legal clubs, say a basketball club, and having this belief in respect for the law and respecting social norms. That's how we have social control. And then labeling just says that society actually creates deviants because we label them as such. And then we ostracize them from regular society by labeling them as a delinquent. So through formal and informal reactions, this person is now just taken on the identity of being a deviant. So primary deviation is going to be the behavior of the individual, but secondary deviation is the behavior of the individual as a result of society's reaction. So while someone can engage in primary deviation, if the secondary deviation wasn't present, if society didn't react in such a negative way to them and label them, then maybe they wouldn't continue on in that offending behavior. We then have conflict theory. So if we look at the socioeconomic class or Marxist criminology, this views the state and law as the ultimate tools of economic interest and the ownership class. So really capitalism, not human nature, creates crime. If we look at power and authority relationships, this idea is that power is a critical variable that explains crime, that individuals want power, they want authority. And group and cultural conflict is really the process of lawmaking, breaking, and enforcement, reflecting fundamental conflicts between interest groups and a more general struggle for control of police power and of the state. These are some different conflict theories that come in. Looking at integrated theories of crime, we have general theory of crime, which says that a lack of self-control is a common factor underlying problem behaviors, and that self-control is the degree to which an individual is vulnerable to temptations at the moment but able to control them. And crime opportunity is then a function of structural and situational circumstances. So this really lack of self-control is the common factor that's underlying the problem behaviors. An integrated social process theory says that living in socially disorganized areas leads youth to develop weak bonds to those conventional groups, activities, and norms, which then we have high levels of strain, plus the weak social bonds, which then leads us into youth seeking out more delinquent peers because there's the individuals who get them. And interactional theory says that delinquency arises from weakening bonds to conventional society, so family, school, values, and that association with delinquent peers plus the delinquent values is what leads into prolonged serious delinquency, and it just continues in a cycle over the life course of a person. So considering again some social policy, we have the Project on Human Development in Chicago Neighborhoods from Felton Earls, which was an interdisciplinary study of how families, schools, and neighborhoods affect a child and adolescent development. So it was a longitudinal study of over 6,000 youth and caregivers, and the neighborhood study of 9,000 residents and a systematic observation of 80 neighborhoods. So a very, very large study. The findings of this were that the neighborhood social processes had a really significant impact on community homicide and violence, and that collective efficacy was really strongly influenced by the neighborhood condition. So they actually still collect data on this, and in 2012, Robert Sampson published The Great American City and Enduring Neighborhood Effect. So Sampson concluded that really, even in today's complex and highly technological world, the community does in fact still matter because life is decidedly shaped by where you end up living. So within this, we're looking at sort of the idea of collective efficacy, where we had homicide and violent victimization rates being seen lower. So those rates were lower when the community shared similar values and had common expectations of behavior with each other and when they trusted each other. The idea of collective efficacy. Then we also had the Los Angeles Family and Neighborhood Survey, where we found that members of racial and ethnic groups appear to exhibit negative health risk behaviors when they do reside in areas that are disproportionately populated with co-ethnic peers. So what this study looked at was sort of what makes a neighborhood a positive place to live, and that's what was found. So this was just sort of two different studies that were applying these different theories to see, is this really how this pans out, and which theories actually tell us what creates crime. So in sum, the classical school believes that individuals have free will to choose to commit crime or not. Biological theories believe people were born criminal, and today sociobiological theories take into account not just biology, but also the environment to put those two together to explain crime. Psychological theories address the psychopathic factors and sensation seeking, as well as delinquency and reinforcement as contributing to continued delinquent behaviors. Sociological theories include structural and social process theories. And then we have our integrated theories that really draw on strain theory to generate an integrated one that's going to capture a larger number of delinquent behaviors. These integrated theories really just integrate a few different theories in one, essentially saying that you can't just pinpoint one simple cause of crime. It's a confluence of different factors that are coming together impacting delinquency. So this was your Chapter 3 lecture looking at the causes of delinquency through multiple various theories. I hope everyone has a wonderful week.